Natasha,
Debbie,
show.
the show.
Welcome to it. Just two patriotic girls.
Learning about the world.
So please, don't take us the wrong way. It's Sunday, and you're here. You made it to the Natasha and Debbie show. Welcome. We're glad to have you.
Happy Sunday. It's a great start to a new week in the middle of January.
Yeah, he lost me at January.
I know.
Ugh. It's the most boring month of all
I
time.
know. Who likes the month of January?
People have birthdays in January, though.
Yeah, that does help to break it up a little bit.
Yeah.
But still, January's typically
January.
kind of a boring month.
It's just cold. It's very cold here. We're not going to talk about the weather. We're turning British. What we are going to talk about is, hey, like button stuff. There, I'm just going to say like button stuff.
If you like today's episode, please hit that like button
Stuff.
and also consider subscribing because it's absolutely free.
So guys, here's the deal. I've had this here video.
This here video.
This here. I have to do that every time. This is the video I've had the longest in my save for us to do on YouTube video reaction videos. Yep, that sentence didn't make any sense at all and it was totally wrong grammatically. But yeah, of all the videos I've held and waited to do, this one I've had the longest. It's been over 2 years now that this video has been in our watch later list to do for you guys and for us to learn about. And it's finally time to do it. Because like Debbie said, it's January. Something to look forward to. Yeah, there is. This episode.
That's right. And today we're going to take a look at the Coldstream Guards, origin of the modern British Army.
That's pretty awesome. So, you know, we like military stuff and military in general. And just a little tidbit that they gave to us in this here description says that the Coldstream Guards who rose to prominence during the English Civil War fighting for the parliamentarian faction. I said that with no issue.
We did.
Parliamentarian faction under Oliver Cromwell, which we've done a whole separate video on. And commanded by George, is it Monck? Monck? Probably wrong on that one. This unit became a staple of the British Army and its oldest active regiment. So, there's a lot to learn here, and I'm excited about this one because I don't know anything about the origins of the Coldstream Guards, the history of them. Do you? Do you?
Do you really know it?
Let us know, and let us know if you learned something with us, because I think this is going to be really, really cool, and I'm quite excited to learn about this part of history that we have yet to do.
A popular image of the British Army throughout the many centuries of its long history is that of the infantryman dressed in the infamous red coat.
Very much so.
The famous crimson military uniform was used for a long time, and its use has even continued up until the modern day. One of the many units to don it in a ceremonial fashion is the Coldstream Guards, a formation that can rightly be declared as Britain's most iconic. But what events brought the UK's oldest army regiment into existence? Welcome to our video on the Coldstream Guard. Located on the northern bank of the River Tweed, near a bend in the watercourse, the quaint 2,000-person strong Scottish town of Coldstream straddles the border between England and Scotland.
Didn't know this.
The Coldstream Community Trust asserts that the town is a gateway to the Scottish borders, and that is a view that has been widely regarded for centuries. What would otherwise just be an ordinary town has instead seen the boots of countless English armies march through it, the crossing being used as an invasion route into Scotland. It was events revolving.
I had no idea that there was actually like a town named
Called Coldstream. I didn't either. I have no idea.
Around this picturesque, drowsy settlement on the Scottish side of the border, which would eventually give the eponymous military unit its name. However, the gathering of soldiers who would eventually become the Coldstream Guard was done elsewhere during the English Civil War, one of the most tumultuous times in British history.
I'm sorry, I have to take a minute to say this. Shrewsbury. Hi, Sarah. Shrewsbury. The animation already is
I'm like
awesome. I'm loving this. It's going to be great. Look at that. That's so cool.
The Civil War, one of the most tumultuous times in British history.
Yeah.
When Charles I raised his banner at Nottingham in August 1622, consequently triggering the outbreak of war, prominent nobles, officers and soldiers across the land were forced to choose sides. Would they support Parliament or the king? One of the men who opted to back Charles was George Monck, a lifelong soldier in his mid-30s. The second son of a staunchly royalist member of Parliament, young George was born and grew up near Torrington in Devon. The brazen youth assaulted a sheriff in his mid-teens and had to go abroad to escape the consequences, becoming a soldier at the age of 16. Monck's military career began in the late 1620s with service in the Spanish army.
Was he not mentioned in something? Did we not? I know we've heard his name before,
Yeah,
and I can't remember.
Probably was mentioned. And
I'm sorry, guys.
it's hard to remember it all.
It really is.
Followed by almost a decade of soldiering in the war-torn Netherlands.
Wow.
By all accounts, the young officer gained a reputation amongst his troops for bravery, exceptional leadership skills, and harsh but fair disciplinarian methods.
Okay.
However, after a disagreement with his employers, Monck resigned his commission abroad and returned to England as a seasoned veteran in 1638. The newly returned man of experience was quickly appointed as lieutenant colonel of a royal regiment. As tensions throughout the British Isles began to increase during the late 1630s, Monck showed off his considerable military prowess, despite the odds being against him. During the Bishops' Wars, he managed to save the vulnerable English artillery after the disaster at Newburn, and succinctly criticised the king's approach to the Irish rebellion long after. When the day came on which George Monck was forced to make the fatal choice, he decided to fight on the royalist side, probably at least partially because of his father's firm loyalties to the crown. The war heated up later in 1642, but Monck was dispatched to Ireland to battle the parliamentarians. Once again he fought with great skill, but declining royalist fortunes in 1644 led to Monck being taken prisoner by a Yorkshire regiment after the royalist defeat at the Battle of Nantwich. He was then imprisoned in the Tower of London, but rather than sitting idle, he used the couple of years of spare time to write a military treatise known as Observations upon Military and Political Matters. Such extensive knowledge in both the strategic and tactical elements of war drew the gaze of a parliamentary commander who was quickly rising to prominence as time went on. That man was Oliver Cromwell, Lieutenant General of the vaunted New Model Army and its most influential political leader. Always in need of competent military officers and intolerant of waste, Cromwell approached Monck with an offer he could hardly refuse. The ex-royalist would be released from prison if he joined the New Model Army and served in its upcoming Irish campaign.
This is fascinating. More than I expected to get. We're getting, this is wow.
Definitely.
Sorry.
Again, tying more things together.
Sometimes I pause thinking I have more to say, and I just want you to know that I really am interested in this. I just want to share that with you, that I find this to be incredibly fascinating. So there, now you know. Hopefully you feel the same.
Forced to choose, Monck agreed to change sides. The newly ranked Monck went off to Ireland with Cromwell and once again served with considerable distinction, this time by commanding parliamentary forces in Ulster. Monck impressed Cromwell so much he was given his very own command and received a regiment from Yorkshire. However, after being told just who their new commander was, the Yorkshiremen rioted. Monck and Cromwell looked more deeply into this, and it turned out that this was the very unit that had captured Monck at Nantwich. The solution was actually quite a simple one: to form an entirely new regiment. While simple, it was a solution that showed just
What?
Yeah, it'd be kind of hard to command people that have already captured you.
Yeah.
in the first
Don't think they're
time.
going to listen to that guy.
No. That's so,
That's
yeah.
kind of hilarious. They're like, why? What's going on? What's wrong? Oh, yeah. Oh, I recognize that
We
guy.
hate you. Sorry.
Agreed.
how eager Cromwell was to get Monck into a position of leadership as soon as possible. In August 1650, somewhere in the vicinity of a Northumberland town called Morpeth,
It's a lot of people.
5 companies of infantry,
Jeez.
each from the regiments of Sir Arthur Hazelrig and Colonel Fenwick, were taken and meshed together to form Monck's Regiment of Foot, the formation which would later become the famous Coldstream Guard.
Okay.
Soon after, Cromwell's 16,000-strong army, along with Monck, preemptively invaded Scotland. the Northern Kingdom had taken the young Charles II as their king
We know.
and wished to use the would-be English king to impose universal Presbyterianism when he regained the throne. After weeks of manoeuvring around one another, the Scots finally cornered Cromwell's force near Dunbar in early September, but he was still confident. Forming up in a column with Monck and his foot in the vanguard, the English army smashed the Scottish units in front of them with incredible skill. The colonel personally led his regiment at the very front, advancing with a half-pike in hand. The parliamentarians won a crushing victory, destroying the Scottish potential for waging war. After Dunbar, the greatest of his victories, Cromwell had a unique medal created for all of the officers and soldiers who had taken part. George Monck's regiment received the honour as well, and it is the only surviving unit in the British Army to have been awarded it.
Really?
The Dunbar Medal belonging to this regiment currently resides in the Guards Museum at Wellington Barracks. When Cromwell marched south, he left Monck in charge of the 6,000 men, and his accompanying regiment left to subdue all of Scotland for Parliament. The colonel didn't disappoint his benefactor, and brought all of the country except for the far Highlands under control. In March 1652, however, Monck was taken ill and returned to England for a while. He recovered relatively quickly and assisted Cromwell in military matters for the latter's remaining reign as Lord Protector, commanding ships during the Anglo-Dutch War of 1652 to 1654, and suppressing further uprisings in Scotland after he returned. While Monck spent years in the north subduing the always fiery Scots, the political situation was degenerating down in England.
It was.
On September 3rd, 1658, Oliver Cromwell died and was succeeded by his son Richard, whose skill in governance and generalship were but a pale shadow of his father's. The inevitable result of such a sudden power vacuum was that
Bristol.
England began to slide back into
Shrewsbury.
civil strife once again.
Sorry.
The Commonwealth, nominally under the younger Cromwell, was under the de facto control of a series of disliked military commanders known as the Major Generals, while the technically more democratic Rump Parliament was widely regarded as ineffective. All of a sudden, by luck more than anything else, Monck found himself in a position of considerable influence. Isolated up in Scotland and far, far away from any political backbiting in the capital, he was insulated from the turmoil which was starting to engulf England, but also had a powerful army under his leadership. With confidence in the loyalty of his soldiers and officers, Monck decided to remain where he was in Scotland, waiting on events. He didn't have to wait long.
I was thinking that.
In October 1659, two of Richard Cromwell's major generals, Charles Fleetwood and John Lambert, marched on London and deposed the vestigial parliament by force. Regardless of its ineffectiveness, Monck was opposed to such a military coup by principle and made no secret of the fact, writing to the Lord Mayor of London in November saying, "I take God to witness that I have no other end than to restore Parliament to its former freedom and authority, and the people to their just rights and liberties."
Wow.
The
Okay,
next
this is
month's
crazy.
events accelerated matters significantly. In December, the military junta in London issued an order to Monck, requiring that he and his officers sign a treaty of loyalty to them in the form of a commitment to the Commonwealth. Unwilling to capitulate to that demand, Monck called a Grand Officers' Council in which all his subordinates present swore to live and die with their general. Then, in order to position himself adequately to act in England if it was deemed to be necessary, the roughly 7,000-strong army in Scotland was moved by Monck from its headquarters at Berwick-upon-Tweed to the sleepy town of Coldstream.
Does anybody else feel like you're like there because of the animation and the storytelling? Like I do. I feel like I'm like part of this moment in history, and it's scaring the hell out of me. Like I could not have stood it. I couldn't have been there.
I'm really appreciative of the graphics, you know, the map
That's what I'm
and
saying.
moving people around. That really helps
Yeah.
you to understand.
If I'd had this in school, I would have actually cared more about history and paid attention better. But I found this to be absolutely incredible.
The presence of so many soldiers strained the local population and its provisions to the breaking point,
Not bad.
and there was only just enough food for everyone. That wasn't the only issue. Such a small town only had limited accommodation, and it is said that the soldiers in Monck's army suffered plenty of discomfort through the winter months.
I'm sure they
Monck
did.
himself wasn't exempt from this period's privations, suffering similar varieties of discomfort and deprivation as his troops. Writing about life in Coldstream at the time, Monck's personal chaplain, Thomas Gumble, stated, "The general's palace was a little smoky cottage that had 2 great dunghills at the door, a hall or entry so dark and narrow as a man could not turn in it. The rooms were worse than I can describe."
Wow.
While hunkered down at Coldstream, the colonel simply observed developments in the south and received many delegates of causes which differed widely from one another. Monck didn't give away his own intentions to anyone, simply content to react to whatever would happen next. In response to a massive build-up of public pressure, Cromwell Jr. backed down and recalled Parliament on December 26th.
Yep.
The moment Monck heard of this up in Coldstream, he gave the famous order for 6,000 of his soldiers, including his personal foot regiment, to march south onto London. The army set out on January 2nd, 1660, and reached Morpeth, the place where the regiment had been created, only 2 days later. On his way south, Monck passed through Newcastle, Durham, York, Nottingham, Leicester, and other prominent English cities, meeting a jubilant liberators' reception all the way. Despite this ever-increasing and seemingly overwhelming public support, however, Monck kept his cards close to the chest. Finally, on the 3rd day of the 2nd month, the 6,000-strong army reached London and entered the city limits. The general settled down and made Whitehall his quarters, while his regiment's troops were billeted in and around St. James's Palace. Having just imposed himself on London with a few thousand armed men, Monck immediately became a pivotal figure in determining where events would go. He was immediately disdainful of how far the Rump Parliament had fallen. Only 4 days after arriving in the city, the general addressed the House of Commons and essentially told them that England was sick of them. Therefore, it was necessary to replace the members of the Rump with something fresh for the common good. Nevertheless, Monck acknowledged that this 20-year-long parliament could only dissolve itself. He was therefore bound to obey it when it ordered him to destroy the City of London's gates because its Common Council had refused to pay taxes, buoyed by Monck's presence. When the distasteful task was done, with no sign of any concessions from either side, the senior officers in Monck's regiment approached their general, declaring that they hadn't marched so far to make themselves odious to the whole nation. Reluctantly, they threatened to resign if Monck continued to obey a parliament which they and he both considered to be utterly defunct.
Yeah, I was wondering how that was gonna go.
With this justification obtained, the general marched his entire army back into the city to support the people and the Common Council against the Rump. A few days later, he wrote a formal letter to Parliament demanding their final dissolution, which was finally accomplished on March 16, 1660, bringing a conclusion to a sorrowful 2-decade episode in British history. Free elections were subsequently held in April to elect a new body of representatives, and unsurprisingly, the popular Monck won a seat. One of the very first acts passed by this new freely elected parliament was to vote for a measure which had become increasingly popular as of the past few months, restoring England's Stuart monarchy, which had been scythed away by the Civil War more than a decade earlier. After all of the minute details had been sorted out, King Charles II was welcomed by General Monck at Dover in late May. As the restorer and kingmaker, Monck was rewarded exceedingly handsomely for his services. He was granted the Order of the Garter, a great honor not only because he was technically born a non-aristocrat, but because he personally received the ribbon from the monarch himself rather than the more standard proxy. In addition, Monck was raised to the status of Duke of Albemarle and appointed Lord General of the Infantry. Along with their commander, Monck's regiment of foot now became titled either the Lord General's Regiment or the Duke of Albemarle's Regiment. Their symbol also became the Order of the Garter's iconic star and has remained so ever since.
Interesting.
Now that the monarchy was here to stay, it was clear that the established Roundhead-created order of the late 1640s and 1650s could not remain wholly intact. There were too many hostile parties and loose ends for that. Front and center in the new king's sights were the new model army, the regiments of which had been radically anti-royalist throughout the Civil War, and whose loyalty could now not be assured. Though this was the case, Charles liked the idea of a standing army and wanted to maintain one for his own uses, but without all of the extra baggage Cromwell's new model would burden him with. Unfortunately,
This is all so fascinating.
I
it's a lot
kind
to
of forgot we were
take
doing
in.
a video. I did.
Just sitting back learning.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot to take in.
Well, and honestly, I'm just yeah. Sorry, guys.
Mhm.
Kind of forgot we were doing a reaction video. My reaction is that I'm watching this.
Watching and learning.
This is incredible.
Mhm.
And I can't remember a lot of stuff that we've learned in this era of time.
Mhm.
But it does put some things together that we have learned about Cromwell and things like that.
Yes.
And yeah. So it's more about George story, in a lot of ways. And wow, what a life this man led.
Yeah, like
and,
you were saying. I mean,
from the teenage years.
yeah,
Good Lord.
16. Wow.
Yeah, he was definitely a general. You can say that for
Definitely a
you can say that
military
for sure. But this is a lot to take in, and also very intriguing and very interesting and intense too.
Fortunately for him, the so-called Convention Parliament, with the Great Civil War still a recent and bitter memory, refused to let any form of military power accrue in the monarch's hands. Therefore, on August 26, 1660, Parliament voted to disband the entire new model army, including Monck's 2 regiments of foot and horse.
Okay.
There was to be only one symbolic concession. For their services to the King of England, Monck's regiments would be the last to be disbanded in their entirety. Little known at the time, this symbolic gesture was actually to have far-reaching practical impacts.
Okay.
After most of the army had been gotten rid of, but 2 days before Monck's regiments were due to lay down their arms, a small extremist religious faction, led by a wine merchant called Thomas Venner, took up weapons and launched a revolt against both king and Parliament. He and as many as 100 supporters rampaged throughout London for days, with the local militia unable to deal with them. With little other option, Parliament hesitantly called on Monck's personal units to deal with the crisis. Supported by some of the king's own personal guard, the small revolt was quick.
It's pretty bad. They're trying to disband him, but then they can't control what's going on. So
call him back in.
hey, come back and help us.
Yeah. Hang on, let's go back to this. I don't want to miss that.
Supported by some of the king's own personal guard, the small revolt was quickly put down, but the outbreak of minor violence did prove a couple of things to Parliament. Firstly, England did have a legitimate need for a professional standing army. Secondly, Monck's regiments in particular were loyal, reliable, and too valuable to lose. A writ annulling the dissolution of Monck's regiments was issued, and on January 26, 1661, Charles II signed a royal warrant sanctioning the creation of a standing army with them at its core. Although its purpose was already accomplished, Parliament's previous act of disbandment was technically still in effect and had to be formally obeyed. So on February 14, 1661, both Monck's infantry and cavalry regiment paraded at Tower Hill in full uniform and regalia, symbolically laying down their arms as formations of the new model army. However, the soldiers were then immediately ordered to bear their weapons again as troops in their monarch's new standing army. They fought a number of actions in the following decade, but at the very start of 1670, General Monck passed away at the age of 62.
He was old.
From
What?
this point,
He did all this up until 60. Dang.
No.
I was
crazy.
wondering a while ago how old he was during, I don't even know. Cromwell was still around. When he was flying around with him to Ireland, I was wondering how old he was at that point. But good Lord. I mean, typically people didn't live to be terribly old at that time period, but still.
No, but between the ages of 16 and 62?
Wow.
Damn.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Dude did
Oh
a
my
lot.
gosh. I wonder if it was the Cromwell video where we first heard his name.
Might have been.
It wasn't mentioned long.
Mm-mm.
It wasn't mentioned long. And if I'm mistaken, I think I'm sorry about my hair. I think that we had some comments about people saying looking into him.
Mm-hmm.
Possibly. But wow. What a, not story, what a history. We're almost done with it too.
General Monck passed away at the age of 62. From this point, Monck's regiment, granted to him by Oliver Cromwell over 2 decades before, was granted the prestigious official title of His Majesty's Coldstream Regiment of Foot Guards. That name, granted to them for the town in which they stayed during that cold winter of 1659 to 1660, has survived for over 3 centuries and persists to this day.
Oh, wow.
I loved that video so much, and I forgot that we were doing a reaction. I did. I'm sorry.
That's when you know the video is good, when you forget what we're doing here.
I'm serious. It was just I was actually wondering in my head for a minute. I'm not gonna lie to you. Why are we laying in bed watching this on the big TV? Why are we watching this in here on the computer? What are your thoughts?
and that's a lot of history, fascinating story. Like you said,
Yeah.
I mean, the stuff that Monck did in his life was incredible.
Yeah.
I do find it kind of ironic that that we're trying to disband them, get rid of them, and then
It did work in his favor, though.
trouble breaks out, and
How'd that happen?
please help us.
Oh, dang.
So that was pretty cool. And then they just, how it all came about.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I would have never known had we not clicked on this video. 2 years I've held this video waiting to watch this one. Wanted to save it for when it's like, again, like Debbie said, January.
I'm glad we got to watch it finally, get this history.
This was really neat.
This wonderful story.
Wonderful animation they did. What a great job Kings and Generals channel did. Hey guys, if you like this episode, please hit the like button. Consider subscribing to the channel. Leave us a comment. Did you learn something here? Because I learned a lot of somethings and I don't have time to tell you everything I learned. It's pretty much the whole video.
Exactly. We learned everything in the video.
Never would have thought. This, like I said, is more a story about George Monck. But his story is so vast.
Yeah.
And there's so much to it that I'm sure there's a lot more than this. I'm sure this is just scratching the surface, but wow. I just, wow. The history is always so intriguing in the UK, and there's so many different parts to it. And then we learn things out of order. We're not doing, and sometimes we haven't. It's been interesting how sometimes I've gotten lucky and picked videos that's like, oh, that actually kind of.
Yeah, they kind of go back to back.
Yeah, it's pretty neat when that happens. But again, I really did enjoy this and learned a lot here, and I would never have known.
That's what I love about doing our show here.
Yeah.
Yes, we get to learn all this stuff and all the history, and hopefully you're learning along with us.
Yeah. Or
at least kind of refreshing your memory of the history in your country.
Thank you guys so much for watching. We do appreciate you being here. We will see you on the next episode. And until then, as always, please love like Jazz.
Be as strong as Tyson.
Bye.
Bye.